not only can you choose the location of where you're going to host, but there's different models you can host, varying degrees of how much you control and how much you're going to pass off to somebody else so somebody else would control. So we're going to talk about different hosting models to include on-premise, co-location and what co-location is, a IaaS setup or infrastructure as a service, a platform as a service, and what is a SaaS or software as a service. So on-premise is a type of private cloud. We've already mentioned that, but it's the stuff that resides on your campus or at your headquarters or in your branch office. You're hosting it on premise, being that it's on site, it's on the property you own. And when it's on the property you own, you essentially are probably managing all aspects of that. So you're managing the data center part of that. That would include power. That would include cooling. That would include even accessing, physical access to that equipment. So all aspects that keep that infrastructure up and running. You're also managing the network, storage, and servers that are within there. You probably, nowadays, most places have some sort of virtualization that's set up on there. That would be, the virtualization would be the hypervisor that's installed physically on those servers. And then a server could have multiple OSs with virtualization. So you are managing all the operating systems that exist in there. You're managing all the middleware, which would be any services that are running on there. So you're managing that runtime environment, all the processes that are running and making sure that it's up and running. And if something goes awry and you get a call in the middle of the night, then you come and you start troubleshooting, looking at those logs. You're looking at data, the databases and the file structures and the application that's running on top of that, everything that's installed within there. So you're managing all of this, and it's all consists on-prem. So we're going to talk about this model right here and how this model can actually vary depending on what kind of situation you have. And you can farm out certain aspects of this to other managed service providers or to other entities. And so let's take a look at a few of those models that we call hosting. So when you host something, what you're doing is you're just farming out certain aspects of this. Now, typically you're hosting a certain section of this, whether it be the data center or you're going to farm out who manages certain sections of this. And usually it typically goes from the ground up, but there could be ways that you go and ask for some sort of managed service provider that comes in and manages certain aspects of all of this. But usually they're going to host, starting from the bottom, something up from there. So let's talk about different models there are for hosting. As mentioned, on-premise just means you're hosting it all on site. So first, let's talk about co-location. Co-location is when you don't have your equipment on premise, but instead you're hosting it at a co-location business. So that business, that data center, is going to manage the data center aspects of this. So they take care of the power, they take care of the cooling, they take care of the physical access to your equipment. And so they have some sort of control over the data center side of this. And what you do is you possibly rent out a rack or a fraction of the rack, or possibly you rent out a cage where no one else has access to a certain area of this data center. And so you are renting out space essentially, but they're providing all the backup generators, they're providing all of the cooling to make sure that there's extra cooling and that if something fails, there's redundancy within that system, and they're controlling the access to that. So they've got all aspects, and you pay for them to manage the data center side of this. That is co-location. Then we have infrastructure as a service. You'll see this IaaS quite a bit, as a service. So that's essentially just the component that's that's farmed out to somebody else. So in this case, it's infrastructure as a service. So anything that's considered infrastructure, they will manage. So in this case right here, they will manage the data center, the networking, the storage, the servers, and the virtualization. That is all of what they will manage. And then after that, you actually manage the operating system, the middleware, the runtime, the data, and the application. So from here on up, you manage that part of it. So that's infrastructure as a service. They manage the underlying infrastructure, and then you just set up your OS on top of that with the middleware, runtime, data, and application, and you run that part of it. Platform as a service, or PaaS, platform as a service, will manage everything up to your runtime environment. So it manages all of this. You're hosting out all of that. Somebody else manages the data center, the network, the storage, the virtualization, middleware, runtime. That's all their part of they manage. And then you manage the application and the data on top of that. Then there is software as a service, or SaaS. SaaS, there's lots of different SaaS companies out there, and they manage the whole application themselves. And so this is all managed yourself. You just get onto, usually it's like a web page that you get onto, and then you utilize that through the web page. Okay, let me give you an example of this. So I'm going to use an example of, I want to set up a WordPress server. I'm going to set up a site, and I want to do some blog posting. And so I'm going to use a WordPress server to do that. It's a service that I can run on servers to set up a blog post site and get that up and running. So what I can do is I can have it on premise, which means I go out and buy a server. I install software onto that server. I install WordPress onto it. I have to install a database onto it. So I do all of this on premise. And then unfortunately, if my lights go out or my internet connection goes out, then I'm responsible for fixing that. Let's say I say, oh, I don't want to be responsible for that. I just want somebody else to take care of the data center side of it. So I go and get a colocation, but I still buy the server. I go up and I set up the server. I install my applications, I install WordPress on it, I get my site all up and running, and then I go on to WordPress and I do the web interface and I set up my site. And so I manage all the rest of this in the co-location example. But I don't really want to be in charge in case that hardware fails. I don't want to manage hardware at all. So I'm going to move on, and I'm going to go into AWS. And in AWS, I'm going to set up, they maintain everything up to the virtualization layer, and I'm going to launch what's called an EC2 instance or a Elastic Cloud Compute instance. So then that machine starts up. I'm just managing the OS and the middleware and the runtime and the application. So once that machine is set up, I do the install of the database onto it, I install WordPress onto it, and then I can get onto WordPress, and it has a user interface on WordPress, and then I start setting up my blog posts and start posting my blogs on there. Now let's say I don't want to manage all of this, and so maybe I go to WP Engine, which they specialize in WordPress, hosting WordPress. So they take care of all this side down here. And all I have to do is go on there and say, no, I want a WordPress site. So launch this, give it a domain, set in a few configurations into it, and then I can start doing my blog posts and start blogging. Hey, like my videos? Hit that like button. So then let's say I don't even want to manage that side of it. All I want to do is a place that I can do blogging and I can send people to. And so then I go and find another service that already has a WordPress site for me. I just set up a user account, and then I have a little site on there that does my blog posting, and they manage the rest of it. I don't need to know anything about how to set up any kind of software or anything. All I have to do is go and start writing my blog posts. So that is a SaaS offering. A lot less that you have to manage with the SaaS, but then you have a lot less control over it as well. There's lots of different examples of each one of these that are out there, lots of different companies that help facilitate this. So we talked about different hosting models, and what model you choose is going to depend on what your needs are, how much money you have to spend on resources, and how much you want to farm out or have somebody else take care of. So on-premise would be where you control everything, versus co-location, you farm out the data center side of things. You have the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And depending on how much you want to manage yourself, you're going to choose what model. And most likely, it's not going to be all or nothing thing. You're going to choose the model for every single service that best suits your needs. So there's going to be some services that you're going to want to host on site, while others you're just going to offer, you're going to buy into some sort of hosting, something that's hosted off site, and you're not going to have to worry about or manage.